I don't know how the past introductions are before, but all right. Hey guys, so this is going to be a little bit of a follow-up talk to last week's, talking about color and light. But this time I'm going to be talking about an efficient way to study color and light using 3D. So obviously, a good way to study is to find, try to isolate objects and then analyze how light reacts on those objects. I think a big problem with using photos or using what's in front of you is there's a lot of indirect light sources and variables to add that add on to the complexity of what you're drawing. So, for example, the pairs of the top right over here, you have multiple shadows. You have the main shadow over here, where the main light is casting. Let's see. You have a main light casting over here, and then you also have like multiple shadows, like sub-shadows over here, because you have multiple light sources coming around from the scene here. So there's all these different light sources that really add on and stuff, and it's a very simple scene, but it's still it's a ton of complexity that if you want to study efficiently, it's good to simplify as much as possible. So some scenes over here, you have the glass material and how it's refracting and reflecting everything around the entire scene. So there's things outside of the scene you have to worry about. You have orangish light over here, which is from the secondary light source. So you have the main light source lighting the scene here, and then you have that's your key light, and then it's not very readable. Okay, you have your key light, and then you also have your fill light, which basically fills in the shadows. So you have a very warm fill light for the shadows over here coming into your scene, and you actually have some reflections over here in the glass. And that's also a huge part of the color of shadows is also the entire scene and the color of the environment in the scene. So that's something you have to worry about here. And so it's kind of a lot to really think about to try to break that down. The photos down here, whenever you're taking a photograph, the camera can't actually pick up the full range of black to white. So the colors end up blending together, and you get overexposed whites, and sometimes your shadows really merge together. So that's an extreme version over here, but you still get that of really insane bright highlights and stuff that, if you're seeing it in front of you, you wouldn't have to worry about that. So if you're taking a photo of an indoor setting or something like that, and you have windows, the light in your camera is not going to be able to able to capture the outside detail of the windows and all the indoors. So if you were to take a photo if you want to set the focus to outdoors or something like that, it can take when you shift the focus, the indoor will get really dark, and if you shift the focus to the indoors, you'll get white windows. So there's a problem with photos of not being able to handle that. And if you were to look at professional photos of someone selling a home or something like that, they would have to take two separate photos and comp it together so that the windows and the photo and the indoors have the same consistent lighting. There's a lot of problems with using photos. When you use what's in front of you, you got so many different varying light sources. So a good way to really simplify things is to just worry about, really simplify the scenes. And it's something really simple like this. You have simple objects. It's something really, really simple that you're not painting a really fancy portrait or anything like that. But the way I see this is kind of like doing sketches inside Photoshop, where they're really quick studies, half an hour studies or something. They're not super pretty, but they really help you understand what you're doing. So something like if you have the scene over here, change to a lighter color. If you have the scene over here, all you're really worrying about, you have a light inside here. If you look at the reflection from this sphere here, you can see exactly what it's reflecting. This is your main light source. That's really all you have to worry about. So now you can track how exactly this sphere reflects this wall over here, how exactly it reflects the blue over here, and you can track the light source, how the light bounces off against the ground here. And I really suggest it's a good way to start if using 3D renders. This one's super simple here. For example, you have like the main light hitting your scene. Like whenever you light a sphere, you have the light hitting your sphere over here. But also, the highlights. You have the diffuse light here, which is just the light hitting your object. But the highlight is actual reflection of the light. So in the sphere over here, it's a square because it's reflecting the square light, right? What that means, since it's actually a reflection of the light source. So for example, if you have the red sphere down here, you have the reflection of the light source, but also these other objects around it are reflecting the light source. And so since this object is reflecting these other objects, you also get other specular highlights over here. And that's just something that you can really narrow down when you're working with simple objects in a scene. And then when you move on to full paintings or something like that, you can really map that out and see what you're doing. Caustics is kind of complex. I can talk about that, but this is going to be a shorter talk. I don't intend to go too complex into lighting, but essentially, you have one light source here, one light source at the top, and it's lighting the room. And that's really all you have to worry about. So you can do crazy complex analysis of how caustics work, which is pretty much, you have the waves, and then the light kind of shines through. And because this is kind of like a lens, this one particular wave, it like narrows down and makes these little like lines here. So that's really what caustics is. But you can study something crazy complex like that, but without worrying about how the sun is working, how all these other light variables. You only have one light in your scene, and that really narrows down how you can study this. So I don't think I'm going to be using this too much, but essentially, when you're actually in, I'm using Maya for example, and you have our light source up here, which is pretty much it's basically acting like a sun. So it's not really a spotlight. It's more like everything in this direction is hitting this area. So you can really simplify. You can really, when you're actually in Maya, you have variables on the right here of specular controls, reflection, diffuse. And I think if you spend the time to mess around in Maya, you can really get, or any software, you can really get an idea of, you can get really familiar of how each object really reflects, how each object really changes. So for example, a specular, you can change the weight over here, and it'll change how much is reflecting that highlight. And remember, if you were listening to the last talk from last week, how rough the object is, how the particles and stuff, how like bumpy and everything it is it kind of diffuses the light because the light bounces against those, and like the different bumps and stuff on it will catch the highlights, and it kind of spreads around a little bit. So for example, the roughness, you can actually change the roughness on here and change how much it spreads. So all these variables in Maya, I'm not going to get too much into how actually using Maya and stuff. I think that's for a later talk, but since this is pretty short, but I'll give some advice. I'll give some like tips for doing this sort of thing if you have not used Maya before later on. But for the purposes of this, just showing that it can get really in depth of all these variables that actually operate on real world logic and real like algorithms of light. So I think we have some objects here. So this is just a simple setup here, but I'm going to change the weight of the speculators down, and then change, for example, we change the color of the ground. You can see how the ground actually reflects the light, how the light actually bounces off and hits the sphere here. Take a look at that. So something simple like that of how light would actually bounce, and how the line here between the shadow and light is actually the darkest because there's a lot of light that catches under here. So if you're doing, not that. Pause this for a minute. Okay. Oh, so I have So pretty much just brought up walls over here, and the walls really, because the environment's a lot more red here now, the red will actually like take up in the color of the shadows. And like I was saying earlier, how the shadows really, they take up the color of the environment around it, or like that, it's a big influence to how the color of the shadow is. So that's a huge difference between, you know, if you're painting warm shadows versus dark shadow versus cold shadows and stuff. If you're using if you're deciding to use, you know, a really, really dark blue for your shadows or really dark red, that makes a huge difference in how realistic your lighting looks. So there's that. Let's hide these walls. So I got something a little bit more complex here, and this is just like quick of what you can do with your objects. So if, you know, you can go and actually download 3D models if you're not, for something like some quick studies that you want to do in like half an hour and stuff. I made this one, but you can download other ones. So you know, like how the light reacts on here. You get like pretty much free range on being able to control all the color and everything in your scene. So you have something like white object or something. You know, if you really want to isolate like how much of how much is the light coming from from the sun, from how much like light is that covering, how much is the bounce light that's really covering this object. So if, you know, if you really want, you can do like microscopic changes. Let's see if you can change the color of the directional light. Let's change this light to, oh, where's the, somewhere here. Oh, here. Okay. So you can change this light, you know, that's your overall light. You can make it something like a yellowish color light. And then, you know, we can see how much of the light is actually changed from the ground here. And that's also, so yeah, so we can change like a bluish light for the ground or purple or something. And you know, these aren't like really pretty studies or anything like that, but then it shows us how exactly the ground plane, how the bounce light actually affects the object on it. So, you know, if you're like doing a portrait or something of a character, then, you know, even under these eyebrows here, they're not completely covered in shadows if they're bouncing light from, you know, object under here or something. If you have like really bright clothing or something like that, really bright red shirt or something, you might get red, you know, bouncing under this eyebrow here. So 3D is also just a nice way of like being able to see form. So yeah, and then, you know, if you want, you can change the material. You know, you can make it glass and then like track and like study how glass works in a simple scene, caustics and stuff. So yeah, so you can also, like, if you haven't had that much experience in 3D, or you know, if you want to be able to do this without, you know, if you need a lot of time to break into 3D or anything like that, you can search. Actually, I have key terms here. I'll go back in a minute. This is my list of things that you can just look up for, you know, for references of renders and stuff. And I think, how did I get this one? I think I looked up like material shaders or something like that. I googled material shaders. You can get some really great references. So this, for example, is a list, and it actually tells you the different variables are in the scene, in this material, and what are changed to get to this material in the very end here. So it's also cool to see the roughness also. Here. So something's really cool is, you know, you get the really blown out light from these scenes, from this illustration, and then like as you put more roughness on the detail, you notice how the little bumps and stuff on here will catch the light, and it spreads out. The light kind of bounces off each other, and different pieces here that stand out catch the highlight. So, you know, the more you get, the more bumps and stuff like that on your object, the more the highlight kind of spreads around. So I'll send this image to the Facebook group, but this is basically the list of key terms I have for if you want to look up stills and stuff like this. There's also copper down here with all the material properties. So we can just look something up, for example. Let's do this. So, I think material shader is a good one. You can just, you can literally look up like whatever material you want to be able to paint, or whatever you want to see how the light works on it. So just look at clay material shader. See what you get. So you get some really nice isolated like render tests and scenes to see how this works. Simple studies of material, and it's really nice to get like these isolated objects that do actually respond to real world light. So both the shadow and the light on here are very. This is still loading, but yeah. So all the light and the shadow and stuff on here is really reflected, really responds to the surrounding environment that you're in. But you can track from this from what color the highlights would be, the color of the environment, and how it affects the scene. So I think it's just a great way of breaking it down, so you don't have to, so you worry about less variables. And whenever you're studying anything, you can figure out what you're studying and then really narrow down those variables to get as few as possible. And this window in the middle here, this sphere in the middle here, the specular highlights here are reflecting the windows at the top. So that's how your highlights are going to look like. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I don't plan on going too much farther beyond this. But if you guys have any questions, I'll send this list of material of key terms to search up. And I would recommend doing studies for these kind of like you would in a sketchbook of just you want to figure out an answer, do it something really quick, spend 20 minutes, half an hour, just rendering something really isolated like that, and it'll help you understand a whole lot of how this works, understand color and light. So when you do a finished illustration, you can piece all of that together. I think I have here. It's really cool, isolating how light goes through objects, transparent objects. I like this photo actually. You have objects that are kind of transparent like that, and light will transmit through them. And so the thinner parts of the objects will be the light will transfer through them, and they'll get really blown out. And you can see this is kind of unrealistic, but then you get to do that in 3D. You get to make things unrealistic and blow them out completely, just to see how it would work, But yeah, if there's no questions, then that's about it. Yeah. You have a question? Or? Thank you.